All right, wait, where's my iPad? Oh, almost fell. If you hear chomping, it's because T'Challa has now finished his food and he's gonna eat Luna's food. So. Hey everyone, it's me again, Brittany, and I'm here today to finally film for you my best books of 2019. These are my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2019. I have been meaning to film this for months. Yeah, better late than never. I keep getting comments from you guys asking if I'm ever going to film this, and yes, I always planned on filming it. I just needed to make time for it, I guess. But I have a list of 10 books here for you guys that I'm pretty sure were my top 10 of the year, my top 10 favorites, and I'm going to be talking about them from my number 10 all the way up to number 1. I feel like a lot of these are really obvious because they're ones that I talked about a ton last year, but I don't know. Let's see if you can guess which ones are going to be on my list. So this is all very exciting. Let's just jump in. Starting at number 10 is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So happy I read this book last year. This book, if you didn't already know, is about Patroclus and Achilles and sort of their story. It is a reimagining of their story, and it's definitely queer and amazing and just so wholesome. They're just so good for each other. Like, Patroclus evens out Achilles. Achilles is very obviously egotistical in his own ways because he is the best of the Greeks, while we have Patroclus, who's very modest and humble and, you know, always is just there to maybe bring Achilles down a couple of notches, and it's just a really great friendship. I absolutely adored the friendship in this story, and when it blossomed into more, I loved it even more. I did not expect the way that this ended. I didn't fully know the story of Achilles, and I don't know. The version that I knew of Achilles was actually different than the one that Madeline Miller wrote, and how Achilles became so invincible, but I was still really fascinated with it the entire time. It felt very honest and real and just so fun while still learning some really great Greek myths, which is always my cup of tea. So yeah, I mean, I had a really good time. They were really lovely. I'm so surprised. I thought I was gonna not like this book at all, and now look. Top 10. Well, it's number 10, but that's still amazing because that means that this is in the top 10%, right, of what I read last year? Because if I read around 100, yeah, there you go. So we're here for that. The next one is going to be Furthermore by Tahada Mafi. When I was compiling this list, I absolutely knew that I would have to include either Furthermore or Witchwood in this top 10 because those stories just hit so differently when I read them. I didn't expect a lot going into it, to be totally fair. I picked up the audiobook without even truly knowing what Furthermore was about. I just kind of wanted to take it off of my TBR, and I did want to buy Witchwood, and I knew Witchwood kind of followed this story. So I finally listened to it, and it was just so beautiful and touching. We follow Alice, who lives in Farronwood, and Farronwood is this absolutely remarkably magical place where the people live in harmony with the land, and because of that they have magic, and the more colorful you are, the more magic you have. But Alice was actually born basically colorless. She has snow white hair and pale white skin, only a touch of color in her cheeks and her eyes, and that is it. So all the people around her are just automatically assuming she has no power of her own, even though she claims that she does. She's always been a little bit strange, and they just don't really give her the time of day. And when she later teams up with Oliver, who gets sent on a task to go find her father, who had been lost for the past 3 years in the land of Furthermore, in this nonsensical land that is actually kind of not good for the Farronwood people because they do get their magic from their land, so when they leave their land they lose their magic. And when they go on this adventure together, they just grow so much and they learn so much, and you just really, it was just so good. It was so good, and it's a little bit tragic, a little bit surprising at times. It wasn't just all lovey-dovey and fun. I think that's why I loved Farronwood and Witchwood. That's why I loved Furthermore and Witchwood so much, because they just have a lot of very serious topics mingled in, topics that are very focused on friendship and making the people around you feel loved and how important that can be to someone. So I had a really great time with it. The world was amazing too, and the way that Tahada Mafi wrote in this one was spectacular. Tahada Mafi has a very lyrical way of writing when she wants to, and it was one of the reasons why I loved Shatter Me so much the first times that I read it, because of like the poetry aspect of it. So having her kind of go ham in Furthermore and in Witchwood, and having her like writing style expand and be its full potential was just so beautiful. I think that the writing was probably maybe the most no, it wasn't the most impressive, but it was a close second. Coming in at number 8 is one that I could not leave off this list, and that is Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. I was really between putting this one or the Tea Dragon Festival on my top 10 list, but I did ultimately decide on keeping it the Tea Dragon Society because this one just was so magical the first time I read it. I felt so attached to it and fell so in love with the world and the characters and just Katie O'Neill's style. It was just an unreal experience, and since I had very like mediocre expectations going into it, it just hit me that much harder. And with Tea Dragon Festival, I definitely had high expectations going into it, so even though they were met, it didn't hit the same way. Tea Dragon Society, this one we follow Greta, who is a blacksmith apprentice to her mother, and she one day goes to the market and she finds a tea dragon that was cornered by animals and was about to potentially get hurt, and she saves it, and she kind of gets thrown into this world of the lost art of taking care of tea dragons and making tea from tea dragons and caring for your tea dragons, and falling into this Tea Dragon Society with a bunch of amazing friends. We have the master, and we have his Boothang, his boyfriend, husband, it's never really clarified whether like his mate person. And then we have another character who's kind of lost and she doesn't remember a lot of her past, and Greta is there to kind of support her and be with her and be a good friend, and it was just so lovely. I think that what made Tea Dragons stand out so much to me is how focused it is on the tea dragons. I love animals, guys. I feel like I say it at least in every single video that I ever film, but I love animals. I feel such a connection with animals. So whenever I see it done very well in anything, it's automatically gonna get moved up in my list of favorites. And I mean, it doesn't hurt that every other part of this book is also amazing. There's just so much respect for each other, and even though she starts to fall in love with the Tea Dragon Society, she doesn't like abandon her blacksmith apprenticing. It almost like encourages her. I don't know. I'm gonna keep gushing about it because I just loved it so much. Alright, number 7 on this list is The Wicked King by Holly Black. So I couldn't leave it off this list. I feel like that's really why it's on this list, because I just couldn't leave it off. I love The Cruel Prince. I still have not read Queen of Nothing. I don't want to talk about it. Wicked King definitely wasn't at the same caliber, in my opinion, for me at least, as The Cruel Prince. I felt like it went a little bit slower at times, and I enjoyed the plot more of The Cruel Prince. But this one, the ending, it saved the book. It saved it entirely. I mean, there were definitely some nice scenes in the middle and sprinkled throughout, but the way that this ended was so surprising and shocking, and just, I love it. Yeah, I loved seeing it. I am trash for the series. I don't know if it's exactly necessarily quality. I feel like the thing is the people that don't like this don't like it because the characters in this are so morally gray. They just don't have very clear motives. They have clear motives, but they don't have very clear morals to their motives. From Jude to her sister to from Jude to her sister to Cardan, they all just have such gray morals, and they're all kind of just fighting for themselves, and they're selfish, and you never really know where it's going because of that. Because at times, yes, they can care for each other or do something for one another, but then they'll just flip the switch out of nowhere because they're just out for themselves. And I think that that's something that, if you don't like morally gray characters, that can really turn you off from the series. And I know that a lot of people didn't love how Prince Cardan treated Jude in the first one. He is a cruel prince. He is cruel. There is like physical and emotional abuse and verbal abuse, and in this one, I mean, it's not necessarily better. I feel like Cardan is better, but maybe Jude is worse. So I still really enjoyed it. If you didn't know and you wanted like a quick little summary, this has to do with the Fae. We have a lot of royalty and politics going on. We have Jude and her twin sister, who are human in the Fae world, which is just like not the thing to be, because Faes love playing tricks on humans, and the Fae that Holly Black writes specifically are like the ones that I feel like are the best known ones, you know, just the tricky Fae, the ones that can't lie, but that can twist their words in different ways to still make you fall into bargains with them that maybe you didn't want to. That was a weird explanation. Number 6 is Morningstar by Pierce Brown. I'm so happy that I finished this trilogy. I picked up Red Rising last year, and even before that, it had been on my TBR for years. It had just been sitting on my shelf unread, and I never had any interest in it. So from it to go from that to one of my all-time favorite series is just such a good journey. We love that for you. And Morningstar was so good. I feel like I've talked about the summary of Red Rising a million times, so I'm not gonna go too far into it. Basically, it's the future and it is in space. We are on Mars and we have Darrow, who was born a red. He is a red human. It's the sort of class system that the world has created, but the different colors are genetically different from each other. They are genetically modified to be good at whatever job they're supposed to be in. And reds are the low of the low. They are basically the slaves of everyone else without even knowing it. And he is born as a red, and he does not stay a red. In fact, he decides that he is going to rocket all the way up to the top tier, which is golds, because he is going to take down the regime. And specifically in Morningstar, I'm not gonna give you any spoilers, obviously, because it is the last book in the trilogy, but it has a lot to do with war. It's very gruesome. It's very interesting. Being in Darrow's mind is so fascinating. He's just so intelligent, and he has such a knack for strategy, and it's really fun to see. He also is going through a lot in the beginning of Morningstar. We kind of see him in like the darkest place that we've probably ever seen him, and him climbing out of it potentially. So there was that, and there's so much mystery because the entire time you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on that's kind of maybe sabotaging them, and who's really in charge of the war and who's starting it and what's going on. And then the ending of this, I actually filmed myself reacting to this in one of my Reading Rush vlogs. I think, or no, it might have been right before the Reading Rush. If I remember, I'll try and link it up here, but I filmed my reaction to the ending because I knew something was gonna happen. And then what happened, I never would have expected, and I'm so excited to move on to Iron Gold. I need to buy it. I haven't bought it yet, but I'm ready for it. Number 5 is Crown of Feathers by Nikki Palpretto. This one, I'm so happy I picked this up. I mean, it's good, guys. And I feel like no one really talks about it. So, I mean, you know what? This one I'll actually give you a good summary for because I feel like it's just not as well known maybe on BookTube. So this world is actually ruled by warrior queens who basically built their empire on the backs of phoenix riders. But everything goes awry when the two sisters begin a war with each other. And we're kind of starting the book a little bit later on in the story after the war's been going on for quite a while between the two sectors. Phoenix riding has been banned. There haven't been phoenix eggs that have been really found, and it's looking pretty bleak as far as the people that actually want to become phoenix riders goes. But we're following Veronica and her sister, who are determined to be phoenix riders, and they're on the run and they're trying not to get caught. They're living in poverty and really bad conditions, but when they find phoenix eggs and try and hatch them for themselves, that's when things go bad. And Veronica and her sister have a huge falling out that leads Veronica to run away from a pretty abusive relationship, to be quite honest, and to try and make it on her own. And she falls into a group of people, and it just is such a good, rich story. I love, again, the bond with the phoenixes, because phoenixes. I'm gonna say phoenixes. But I really adored the bonds that there are with the phoenix because they're just so interesting and in-depth. There is a lot that goes into it. It's not just that like any rider can ride any phoenix. They're bonded together. It's almost like a kind of Aragon situation. If you guys read Aragon, then you know, or watched the movie, that the dragons, they like bond with the person that hatches them, and it's very similar with the phoenix riders. So I really appreciated that. I loved seeing the different phoenix kind of characterizations. It was really loving in a weird way. I mean, you do see a lot of abuse. Again, Veronica and her sister do not have a good relationship. Her sister is quite abusive towards her, and it's pretty obvious right off the bat, and it just gets worse. So when she kind of runs off and starts to make all these other bonds with other people, but I feel like all of them are just going through it. I mean, to be fair, I feel like in war, everyone's always going through it. But the friendship was done so well. I really feel like the relationship in this grew very naturally, and I adored it. And again, the phoenix. they're my favorite part. I really enjoyed the ending of this. There was a huge plot twist that I had no idea. I mean, I had an inkling that maybe something along those lines was gonna happen because there definitely are hints throughout the entire story, but the exact way that it actually happens was nowhere near my mind. So when the plot twist came to fruition and we got to see what was going on and kind of the mystery behind, you know, Veronica's life, because it is all just shrouded in mystery, it was very satisfying and I cannot wait to get on to the next book. I talked about that one for a long time. I feel like I can't say this one without thinking of the song anymore, but number 4 on my list is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. And I feel like my top 5, so starting with Crown of Feathers, these are all very like even with each other. So this numeric version of it is kind of loose. The top 5 are all pretty much on the same tier. So number 4, Renegades. I adored this when I read it. I knew it had to be on my favorites list because the way that I felt about this after was just incredible. I kept telling everyone about it. I kept recommending it to people. I got my dad to read it. I just loved it so much, and I really feel like it was done so well. I didn't think I'd like it either because it is a superhero story, and I wasn't sure how I'd feel reading that, even though I'm a huge superhero fan. So I don't know. I, for whatever reason, am pretty stubborn when people say I'm gonna like something. I just am like, no, there's no way. And then I'll stick to that until I read it, and then I'm like, wow, I love it. And it was no different with Renegades. Let's talk about it. Basically, we're in a world where there are prodigies, and prodigies are humans that have extraordinary abilities. And when prodigies first started coming around, they were definitely feared, and with fear, they were given the lowest of the low, they were mistreated, and they were scared always. And that's when the anarchists rose. And the anarchists kind of end up being the supervillains of the story because when they rose, they really brought down society and crime was abundant and they ruled over the humans. So then came the renegades, who are still prodigies, but that wanted to be more superheroes, that wanted equality for all. And they took down the anarchists and tried to create a more equal and better world. In this one, we are following Nova, who desperately wants to get vengeance against the renegades for the deaths of her family. She definitely blames the renegades for her mother and father dying and for her uncle's demise, and she is in line with the anarchists. So when she infiltrates the renegades and becomes a part of them to be a spy for the anarchists, things get a little weird because she meets Adrian, who is the most renegade of the renegades. His parents are both renegades, the ones that actually led the revolution against the anarchists, but he actually may not be as cookie cutter as he seems. He actually might want a little bit more for the renegades because the renegades are so strict and they really like their rules and they need their rules for their society to function, but maybe their rules aren't exactly what the world needs, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more of a gray area. So Adrian and Nova kind of intertwining is just perfect because they're both imperfect pieces of like their groups. Yeah, I mean, I just really like it because it definitely talks about a lot of what really makes a hero a hero. I can't exactly like put it into words, but I do have a quote that actually is from the book that I really like. But it says, "Heroism wasn't about what you could do, it was about what you did. It was about who you saved when they needed saving." And I feel like that was a big piece of it because the renegades really put themselves on this top of the top tier, and they think that they're doing everything perfectly and they're just trying to get everyone to be equal and perfect, but the society that they're creating is very dependent and they should learn maybe to think a little bit more for themselves, which is something that I think is lacking with their regime. But it's just really cool to watch it happen, to watch Nova try and break it down, but also kind of like see them battling in their minds, because we're seeing both perspectives. We do see Adrian's perspective and we see Nova's, so it's just really fun to know what like is going on in each other's heads, but like have them not know what's going on. I'm happy. I liked it a lot, obviously. I feel like the closer we get to number 1, the more I talk. All right, number 3 on my list, we're in the top 3, oh my goodness, is Poppy War by R.F. Kong. I knew this was gonna be on my favorites. I knew it from the moment I picked it up that it was gonna be on my favorites, and it did not let me down. Actually, out of all of these, this is the only one I annotated. Awkward. Yes, I do still annotate, by the way. I keep getting questions about that, and I do still annotate, I just don't talk about it as much. Poppy War, I feel like a marker for me. One thing that makes me really notice that something should be in my favorites list is if I talk about it a lot. If I keep thinking about it once I put the book down, if I recommend it to people, if it's just something that's always at the forefront of my mind, it obviously must be a favorite. And the Poppy War is definitely one of those for me. I just love the world that R.F. Kong has made for us. To give you a brief summary, we're following Rin, who is a war orphan, and a poor one at that, who wants desperately to escape her life because she is very mistreated by her foster home. Her adoptive parents, really. And she knows that one of the best ways to do this is to try and take the Keiju and to try and get the best score possible so that she can get accepted into the academies, but not just any academy, because since she doesn't have money, she's gonna need to go for free. So she needs to do absolutely flawless on her test to get into Sign Guard Academy, which is the top of the top. And we start this story off with her studying desperately for the test and her acing the Keiju, and no one believing it because she is just a peasant war orphan who cannot possibly have gotten 100% on the test without cheating, but she did. But that's just the start of her difficult journey, because she is now going to an elite school, a place where really only rich, top-tier families have been able to get into, and she looks a lot differently than all of them. She has darker skin than all of them. She speaks differently than all of them. She is obviously coming from a different background than all of these people, and there's a lot of racism and classism that plays a part in her finally kind of making her own path and wanting desperately to have the power and equality that everyone else just gets automatically. And she does that by turning to shamanism, which is just so freaking cool. It's just from the school aspect of this, because the school itself and like the things that they're learning and the mind that is Rin's, because she is so intelligent, and again, this is another one that has a lot to do with strategy. I don't know, the school system alone was amazing. And then the war aspect of this was a lot. And then we have the shamanism aspect of this, which I adored. I really feel like it was so much fun to watch all these like philosophies on life and get to read it and pretend to be as smart as Rin, because she's just so freaking intelligent, and it's just so interesting to see into her mind and see into her teachers' minds, because they're all obviously very intelligent as well. And then we have the war aspect of this all, because the war is brutal, it's gruesome, it's a lot. I would definitely look up the trigger warnings if you feel that you might be sensitive to it. I feel like most people, even when they don't feel they're sensitive to it, still are shocked by the brutality of this one. There is a lot of very dark and gritty and detailed talk about sexual assault and rape and murder and just senseless violence. So if you are sensitive to any of that stuff, definitely look it up. But if you think you can handle it, it is just so interesting to read. I mean, reading fantasy, I've read fantasy for a really long time, but I feel like most of the time authors obviously leave out the dark aspects of war. And this was probably one of my first times really reading it and seeing how dark it can really get. And I enjoyed that aspect of it. It was kind of like an eye-opener. This whole book was an eye-opener. I could not stop thinking about it after the fact. And, well, to top it off, so all of those things were amazing, but also the characters were so flawless. They were all so distinct. They all had very obvious motivations and personalities, and I never felt like I didn't get enough of any of them, even though they weren't necessarily in the story the entire time. I just really felt like they were very fleshed out, so I appreciated that. And again, Rin is another morally gray character, so I just love morally gray. Number 2 on this list, can you guess what it is? I don't know if you can, but it's Monstrous by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. I mean, any one of the 3 volumes of Monstrous that I read this year could have been in this spot, but I just picked the first one just for continuity's sake, just so you guys know what the first one looks like. I fell in love with this graphic novel series. I just love it. I love it so much. Whenever anyone asks me for recommendations and they haven't read this graphic novel yet, this is the first one that I recommend. It is my favorite. I've fallen very much in love with it. I think that the world building is done so well, which is something that I was kind of nervous going into this kind of graphic novel with, because it is taking place in a pretty complex world. We are in like this very beautiful Art Deco, steampunk style world, and there is a brutal war going on between the humans and the Arcanics. I feel like this is another one that actually does a very good job of describing how gruesome war can really get and showing you the very dark aspects of it. So this is kind of actually in line with the Poppy War in that aspect, which is kind of funny. I didn't plan that. It is a fantasy story. The Arcanics are kind of these animal looking gods that obviously bred with humans, and then all the halflings that are out in the world are who the humans are taking out their frustrations on for no reason. They just hate each other. There's a lot of racism in that aspect in this book, and in this series. And specifically we're following Micah, half-wolf, who has a very, very mysterious past, shrouded in mystery. She has no idea why she is the way she is and how she got there, and she's just trying to figure it all out while being hunted down, and also while being probably one of the most dangerous beings out on the planet, because she has something inside of her that no one else has ever experienced. She has a monster inside of her, and yeah, it's just really good. It's so interesting. And I mean, if you needed anything else to like convince you to read this, her sidekick, or it's not really a sidekick, but like her companion throughout this story is this little half fox toddler girl who she saves in the very beginning of this. That's not a spoiler, but it was kind of like fun because when she first saved her and like kind of showed compassion in that aspect, because Micah Half-Wolf can be a little bit compassionless throughout this entire story, but seeing her with this little half fox is just so wholesome and sweet. It's just so nice to see that other side. I mean, it's that typical like dark, broody, stormy character, and then the little sunshine character that makes them like the only person that they'll interact with. I appreciate that. And we also have talking cats in this, which they are necromancer cats, which they are called nekomancers because neko in Japanese is cat. It's just really good. And what I was saying is I was worried that the world building may not have been as strong as I would have liked, but there are breaks where these cats, because they're actually like the philosophizers and like librarians basically of the world, they'll kind of talk about the actual world in between chapters, and sometimes it can be like a little annoying because there's just so much information on that page, but it has really built up this very, very well done world. So well done. Like a steak? That's not the word I was looking for, but you know what? We're just gonna move on because we're on the last book. And number one, like I said, my top 5 are all pretty even with each other, so this isn't like an obvious number 1 for me. Like this was a little bit difficult to range these, but I feel like this is the last one that I wanted to talk about. Can you guess? Can you guess what it is? I'll give you 3 seconds. Put your guesses down below, comment your guess. And if you're right, I'm proud of you. You watch my channel a lot and I appreciate it. So yeah, number 1 is going to be The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the first set of short stories in the Witcher world novels. There are 2 books of short stories. We have this one, and then we have Sword of Destiny, which I don't have. I do think that Sword of Destiny I liked better actually than The Last Wish, but I don't own it, so we're holding up The Last Wish. And then we have his actual series that starts with Geralt of Rivia, which starts with Blood of Elves, and there's like I think 5 books in it. But I read The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny last year, and like to preface this, just in case you are new here, I played the video games for The Witcher. I started them maybe like a couple of years ago. Well, not the video games. I played The Witcher 3 because I started with that one and I just can't go back to the other graphics. But I've played The Witcher 3 a few times now, and I was absolutely obsessed with the video game. It was like the first real video game that I've ever played, like on a PlayStation and everything. And I adored the story so much. And when I found out that there were books about it, I went out automatically and bought them. And that was maybe last year. But this year, when the series got announced, the Netflix series, that was the push I needed to actually pick them up. And I'm so glad I did. This world is amazing. I love it. I love the characters in this. They're just so fleshed out. And it's probably because I have like 3 different medias that I feel did them all justice in their own ways. And I just feel like I know it so well, but it's so different also than all the fantasy books that I've read, because we're following Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher, and witchers in this world were actually originally humans, but they went through mutations, which most don't survive through, but if you do, then you become a witcher and you are stronger, you live longer, you have just extra abilities so that you can face the monsters that plague this world and kill them and protect the humans. And Geralt specifically, he has a few extra mutations. He's a little bit more witchery, and he's just so much fun. And there's Yennefer, who is this amazing sorceress who we stan. I don't know the old me who used to love Triss. She only had played the video games. We can't judge her. But now I'm definitely a Yennefer stan, and I love everything about this story. It's so good, and like there's just so much lore in it and so many interesting monsters and rituals and potions, and it's just amazing. I absolutely adore it. I also like read an interview recently with Andrzej Sapkowski, and he's just like a badass, so I highly recommend looking into interviews if you liked the show, and I highly recommend checking out the books. For the Netflix series, it is only the short stories, so yeah. That was it. Wow. Oh my gosh, that was the 10 books that were my top 10 of 2019. I can't believe I finally filmed it, and I think I talked for 40 minutes. Yikes. So, oh, that's fun. Those were the top 10 books of 2019. Let me know if you guys guessed correctly. Let me know if we share any of our top 10s, or if I inspired you to read any of these, because I really feel like my brain was all over the place during this video, and I didn't give very good reasons as to why I loved them, because I just love them all so much that all I want to do is gush about it. So editing is going to be fun. But yeah, let me know if you guys were inspired to pick any of these up, or if you have any recommendations, I guess, because these are my top 10 obviously. So if you're seeing any re-emerging themes and you know a book that might be to my needs, definitely leave that down below as well. Thank you guys also for being so patient with me for the start of this year. It's been a hard one. It's just, I mean, there's been a lot that went on, from moving to just work to having to move again to just actually the other day a like family issue. If you follow me on Twitter, then you saw, but I don't really want to talk about it right now. We're in a high mood, but yeah, it's been a rough beginning of the year, so this video is coming a lot later than I originally thought it would, but thank you again for being patient and for caring to still watch it and for watching this video. I appreciate you. Keep an eye out for the worst books that I read in 2019. That one is gonna be interesting. I feel like I don't read that many bad books, so don't expect too much out of it, but that one is definitely going to be the next video I post. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Thank you again so much for watching. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye!